Chapter 1. The Daughter of Water. Water sang through crystal pipes beneath Thalia Maravan's feet as she traced her fingertips along the cool glass wall. The sound echoed through her private chambers in the upper tiers of Aquilon, a gentle melody that had been the backdrop to her entire life. Outside her window, the massive creature that carried the walking city let out a low, rumbling breath that vibrated through the walls. 17 years, and that sound still made something primal in her chest tighten. The beast had been traversing the endless desert for 3 days now without rest, its 6 enormous legs creating ripples in the sand that stretched for miles. They were due to reach the Sapphire Oasis by nightfall, where the creature would drink its fill while the city replenished its water reserves. Thalia sighed, resting her forehead against the glass. From this height, she could see the entirety of Aquilon's terraced structure. Crystal spires caught the morning light, refracting it through water-filled columns that powered the city's intricate machinery. Cascading gardens tumbled down the sides of the mammoth's shell, their lush green foliage sustained by Aquilon's miraculous irrigation systems. Market streets teeming with merchants wound their way through the lower tiers, surrounded by the blue and silver banners of her father's house. It was beautiful. It was suffocating. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, a young woman with chestnut hair elaborately braided with silver thread and water-blue gemstones as befitted her station. Her unusual deep blue eyes, almost violet in the morning light, held a carefully masked weariness. A knock at her door broke her reverie.
"Enter,"
she called, straightening her posture and composing her expression into one of serene dignity, the mask she'd perfected over years of diplomatic training. The door opened to reveal her father's chief attendant, Marsul, his thin frame nearly lost in the voluminous blue robes of his office. He bowed deeply.
"Lady Thalia, the Father Mark requests your presence in the Ripple Chamber immediately."
His voice carried the crisp, precise tone of someone who had spent decades relaying messages of state importance. Thalia felt a flicker of unease. The Ripple Chamber was reserved for the Fathermark's most sensitive diplomatic meetings.
"Did my father say why?"
She kept her voice measured, betraying none of her curiosity.
"Only that it concerns tomorrow's Convergence Masquerade, my lady. And—"
He hesitated, which was unusual for the normally unflappable attendant.
"He mentioned that Lord Aurelius of Pyritus has requested formal communication."
Something cold settled in Thalia's stomach. Cormac Aurelius, the young sovereign who had assumed leadership of Pyrotus only 6 months ago after his father's mysterious illness. The walking city powered by massive furnaces that had been threatening Aquilon's water claims for the past season.
"I see. Please inform my father I will join him shortly."
"At once, Lady Thalia."
He bowed again and retreated, closing the door silently behind him. Alone once more, Thalia allowed her perfect posture to slump for just a moment. She moved to her dressing chamber where her handmaiden, Lissa, had already laid out appropriate attire for a formal diplomatic meeting. Layers of flowing azure silk embroidered with silver patterns that mimicked water currents.
"What could Pyritus want that requires the Ripple Chamber?"
she thought as Lissa helped her dress. "Their furnace core have been threatening our water caravans for months. Is this an escalation or an attempt at reconciliation?"
"You seem troubled, my lady,"
murmured Lissa, as she fastened a series of delicate silver clasps along Thalia's spine. Thalia smiled faintly. Lissa had been with her since childhood and could read her moods better than anyone.
"Just contemplating politics, Lissa. Nothing unusual."
"Politics?
Lissa clicked her tongue disapprovingly.
On such a beautiful morning? When the masquerade is tomorrow."
She secured the final clasp and stepped around to adjust the drape of Thalia's sleeves.
"You should be thinking of which mask you'll wear. Which mysterious gentleman might sweep you into the gardens for a forbidden dance."
Forbidden dances aren't part of my diplomatic training, unfortunately.
Thalia replied dryly, though there was humor in her eyes.
Besides, who would dare? Everyone knows exactly who I am, mask or no mask.
Lys's expression softened with sympathy.
Perhaps that's what makes masquerades so perfect, my lady. For one night, you could be anyone.
Anyone but myself.
Thalia thought, but kept the melancholy observation to herself. Instead, she allowed Lyssa to place a circlet of silver atop her braided hair, her official symbol of station as the Fathermark's daughter.
Thank you, Lyssa.
She squeezed the handmaiden's hand briefly before turning towards the door.
Wish me luck with whatever new diplomatic crisis awaits.
You don't need luck, my lady. You have your wits, which are sharper than most of those counselors combined.
Thalia smiled genuinely at that, then stepped into the corridor where two guards in the blue and silver of Aquilon fell into step behind her. The upper tiers of Aquilon were a marvel of engineering and beauty. Thalia walked along open-air passages where water flowed through transparent channels embedded in the walls, refracting sunlight into dancing patterns across the polished stone floors. Crystal domes arched overhead, their facets carefully designed to capture and filter the harsh desert light into a cool blue glow. As she descended toward the heart of the city, the passages grew busier. Lesser nobles and high-ranking civil servants bowed respectfully as she passed. She acknowledged each with a precise nod, not too deep to diminish her station, not too shallow to cause offense. Lessons in proper acknowledgement had begun when she was barely 5 years old. Thalia's steps slowed as she passed the entrance to the engineering archives. Through the open doors, she caught glimpses of the massive diagrams detailing Aquilon's water systems. She'd spent countless forbidden hours there, studying the ingenious methods by which her ancestors had transformed a city that should have died in the desert into a water-producing marvel.
No time for that today,
she reminded herself, forcing her feet to continue past the tempting repository of knowledge deemed unsuitable for a Fathermark's daughter. The Ripple Chamber was located in the heart of the governmental sector, a circular room whose walls were formed entirely of flowing water contained between sheets of crystal. The water moved constantly in subtle patterns, making it impossible for sound to penetrate from either direction, a perfect location for Aquilon's most confidential discussions. Guards opened the intricately carved doors for her, revealing her father seated at the central table with his 3 most trusted advisors. The Fathermark of Aquilon was an imposing figure, his broad shoulders draped in robes of deepest blue, adorned with silver embroidery that depicted the history of their walking city. His dark beard was threaded with silver, and his eyes, the same unusual deep blue as Thalia's, were fixed on a document before him.
"Ah, Thalia,"
he said, looking up at her entrance.
"Come, join us. We have much to discuss before tomorrow's masquerade."
She took the empty seat to her father's right, noting the tension in the room like a tangible current. Grand Hydrologist Nerin, with his perpetually damp robes and water-wrinkled fingers, was frowning deeply. Master Strategist Verin looked as though he'd bitten into something sour, while Trade Minister Ilara's expression was carefully neutral, which, for the usually expressive woman, was concerning.
Father.
Thalia greeted with a formal incline of her head.
I understand Lord Aurelius has requested communication.
The Fathermark's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded.
"Indeed. As always, news travels quickly in Aquilon."
He pushed the document toward her.
"Lord Aurelius has sent this ahead of his city's arrival at the Sapphire Oasis."
Thalia carefully picked up the parchment, noting the red seal of Pyrotus, a flame encircled by a gear, had already been broken. The message was brief but unmistakable in its significance. To His Eminence, Fathermark Davrin Maravan of the walking city Aquilon, in recognition of the growing tensions between our great cities, and with sincere desire to forge lasting peace across the endless desert, I, Cormac Aurelius, Lord Sovereign of Pyrotus, propose a traditional alliance through matrimony. I would be honored to discuss terms for a formal betrothal to your daughter, Lady Thalia Maravan, during the Convergence Masquerade. May water and flame find harmony where once there was discord. Lord Cormac Aurelius, Sovereign of Perotus. Thalia read the message twice, keeping her expression carefully neutral despite the sudden roaring in her ears. She placed the parchment back on the table with fingers that only someone who knew her well would notice were trembling slightly.
I see.
She said, her voice remarkably steady.
And has the Fathom Arc formulated a response?
Her father's eyes softened slightly, the mask of state slipping just enough for her to glimpse the father beneath the ruler.
Not yet. I wish to discuss this with you before proceeding.
Though there is an obvious strategic advantage,
Interjected Master Strategist Verin, his thin face pinched with calculation.
Piratus has been threatening our water caravans for months. Their furnace core have been spotted within miles of our reserve oases. An alliance would secure our western territories and stabilize trade routes.
And their industrial capacity would complement our water resources.
Added Trade Minister Alara.
Economically, it would be most beneficial, especially with the eastern routes becoming increasingly dangerous.
We cannot trust them.
Grand Hydrologist Nerin said flatly, droplets of water clinging to his white mustache.
3 of our water scouts disappeared near their territory last month. Their technology is advancing rapidly under Lord Aurelius, and not in ways that bode well for the desert's balance.
The conversation swirled around Thalia like water spiraling down a drain, familiar and suffocating. Always the same. Her value measured in strategic advantage, in trade opportunities, in political capital. Never in her dreams or desires.
And what does the Fathom Arc think?
She asked, looking directly at her father, deliberately using his title rather than addressing him personally. He met her gaze steadily.
I think Lord Aurelius's timing is suspicious. His father was a reasonable man who respected boundaries. The son,
He shook his head slightly.
the son is an unknown quantity. Ambitious, certainly. Whether this proposal represents genuine desire for peace or a calculated move to gain access to our water technology remains to be seen.
And what of your daughter's thoughts on the matter?
Thalia asked, the question slipping out with more edge than she'd intended.
Does she not merit consideration in this equation?
The advisors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Her father regarded her with an expression that mingled sympathy with firm resolve.
Thalia, you have always understood your position. You are not just my daughter. You are a daughter of Aquilon. Your responsibilities...
Extend to the whole city, yes.
She finished for him, having heard the phrase countless times throughout her life.
I'm well aware of my duty, Father. I merely wish to know if my thoughts on this proposal are of any relevance to the discussion.
A heavy silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the gentle sound of water flowing through the crystal walls.
Of course they are,
Her father said finally.
What are your thoughts, then?
Thalia took a measured breath. This was not the time for emotion. This was diplomacy. And in that arena she had been trained extensively.
I think Lord Verin is correct about the strategic advantages.
She began carefully.
And Minister Alara makes valid points about the economic benefits. However, I agree with Grand Hydrologist Nerin that the timing and motivation are suspicious.
She paused, choosing her next words deliberately.
I would suggest neither accepting nor rejecting the proposal outright. The masquerade provides an opportunity to assess Lord Aurelius personally, to gauge his character and true intentions before committing to any formal response.
Her father nodded slowly, a glint of approval in his eyes.
A measured approach. We will meet with Lord Aurelius during the masquerade as he requests. Thalia will participate in these discussions as is appropriate, and we will make no commitments until we are satisfied as to his intentions.
The advisors nodded in agreement, though Nerin still looked troubled.
There is another matter,
Her father continued, his expression growing more serious.
the dream plague resurgence.
Thalia felt a chill run down her spine at the mention of the ancient affliction. For months now, Reports had been trickling in from across the endless desert of disturbed sleep, strange shared dreams, and in some cases, people falling into coma-like states from which they couldn't be woken.
3 new cases in the lower tiers yesterday,
confirmed Neren grimly.
all reporting the same dream. Endless crystal caverns beneath the sand, and 9 voices calling in unison.
Superstitious nonsense.
Varen dismissed with a wave of his hand.
A common illness, being given mystical significance by the uneducated.
The timing is troubling, however.
Alara pointed out.
Cases increasing as we approach the convergence of walking cities. The last major outbreak was recorded 50 years ago, at the previous grand convergence when all 9 cities met at the Mother Oasis.
Thalia felt something stir within her at the mention of the dreams. For weeks, her own sleep had been disturbed by visions of crystal caves and distant voices, though she had told no one. The dreams felt significant, personal somehow, as if they were trying to convey a message specifically to her.
We will discuss the dream plague with the other city leaders during the convergence,
Her father decided.
For now, keep the affected isolated and comfortable. Thalia, I'd like you to visit them this afternoon. Your presence brings comfort, and perhaps they might share details with you that they've withheld from the healers.
Of course, Father.
She inclined her head, hiding both her unease at confronting the dreams that matched her own, and her relief at having a task that would allow her to escape the stifling confines of diplomatic preparation.
Good. Then we are adjourned until this evening. I'll expect reports from each of you before the masquerade preparations begin tomorrow.
The meeting concluded, and Thalia rose with the others, careful to maintain her perfect posture and serene expression until she was alone in the corridor outside. Only then did she allow her shoulders to drop slightly, exhaling a breath she felt she'd been holding for years. Instead of returning to her chambers, Thalia found her feet carrying her downward toward the lower tiers of Aquilon. She dismissed her guards with a firm command that brooked no argument, using the authority her father had granted her for official visits to the city's functioning areas.
Just for an hour.
She promised herself. An hour to think, to breathe, away from preparations and proposals and politics. The heart of Aquilon pulsed with activity as she descended. The middle tiers housed the workshops where artisans created the city's famous water glass sculptures and the mechanical innovations that kept Aquilon functioning. Here, she wrapped a simple blue cloak around her formal attire and pulled the hood up to shadow her face. It wasn't a perfect disguise, but the workers were too busy to pay close attention to yet another blue-clad figure moving through their midst. She slipped into the water art sanctuary through a side entrance she'd discovered years ago. The vast circular chamber was mostly empty at this hour, its domed ceiling capturing the desert light and refracting it through suspended crystal prisms that cast ever-shifting patterns across the floor. Only a few apprentices moved silently about, arranging crystalline vessels beneath the watchful eye of Master Hydromancer Delan. Thalia made her way to a secluded alcove hidden behind a massive column of flowing water where liquid cascaded down in precisely controlled patterns that changed shape with musical tones too subtle for most to hear. Here, tucked away on a high shelf carved from living crystal, was her personal collection of water enchantment scrolls and journals. Forbidden knowledge she'd been accumulating since she was 14. She pulled down a worn journal bound in waterproof silk and opened it to her latest aquamantic designs. The pages shimmered with delicate watercolor illustrations interwoven with arcane symbols and flowing script that seemed to move like currents when viewed from different angles. Complex glyphs for water direction and crystalline resonance patterns danced around her artistic renderings of Aquilon's western moisture collectors. This was where she felt most herself. Not in diplomatic chambers discussing her potential value as a political bride, but deep in the mystical connection between water, crystal, and sound that gave life to the city she loved.
If only Father could see the value in this.
She thought, her fingertips tracing a particularly elegant glyph that glowed faintly at her touch. Instead of seeing only my value as a daughter to be bartered for alliances, for over an hour she lost herself in the artistry, her brush dipping into enchanted pigments that shimmered with captured dewdrops as she refined her designs for a resonating water harp that could coax moisture from even the driest desert air. The delicate work required absolute focus, calming her mind and drawing her thoughts away from Lord Aurelius's proposal and the troubling dreams that had been haunting her sleep. A soft chiming sound, like crystal touched by a water droplet, broke her concentration. Thalia looked up to find Master Hydromancer Delan standing a respectful distance away, his weathered face creased with a knowing smile beneath his silver-streaked beard, tiny droplets of water orbiting his fingertips like miniature moons.
"Lady Thalia,"
he said quietly, the water droplets forming momentary symbols of respect in the air, before dissipating as he offered a bow, just formal enough to acknowledge her rank without drawing attention to her presence.
"I thought I might find you here today."
Thalia smiled faintly. Delan had discovered her secret studies years ago, but had chosen to encourage rather than expose her.
The Fathermark would not approve,
she said, gesturing to the water enchantment scrolls spread before her.
"The Fathermark is a wise ruler, but even wise men can be blinded by tradition,"
he replied, settling his bulky frame onto a crystal stool opposite her. With a gesture, he summoned a sphere of water that hovered between them, reflecting their faces.
"Your design for the resonance harps in the Western collectors."
He traced a pattern in the hovering water that mirrored one of her glyphs.
"Exquisite work. We implemented your harmonic sequence last month. The moisture yield has increased by 12%.
A warmth bloomed in Thalia's chest, pride and satisfaction unlike anything she felt in the diplomatic arena.
You didn't tell them where the design came from.
Would it have been implemented if I had?"
He raised one bushy eyebrow, causing the water sphere to ripple with his amusement. They both knew the answer. Despite being the Fathermark's daughter, or perhaps because of it, her water artistry would have been dismissed as a noblewoman's decorative dabbling rather than recognized as the powerful aquamantic innovation it truly was.
"One day, Lady Thalia, things will change. Aquilon cannot afford to ignore gifts like yours simply because they belong to women."
He glanced at the water clock embedded in the wall, its liquid marking time by flowing through intricate crystal channels.
"But for now, I believe you have duties elsewhere. The Dream Plague victims are expecting the Fathermark's daughter, not a hydromancer in disguise."
Thalia sighed and began gathering her materials, the enchanted pigments flowing back into their crystal vials at her touch.
Sometimes I think the two are entirely separate people, Master Delan. The Fathermark's daughter and the Hydromancer in disguise.
"Perhaps,"
he said, helping her return the scrolls to their hidden location with gentle currents of air that lifted them to the highest shelf.
"Or perhaps they are two sides of the same remarkable person, each with strengths the other needs."
She smiled gratefully at him, then pulled her hood back into place.
Thank you, Master Delan, for everything.
"It is Aquilon who should thank you, my lady."
With a subtle gesture, he created a small crystalline flower from condensed water vapor and offered it to her.
"Whether they know it yet or not."
Thalia slipped out of the archives and made her way toward the healing chambers in the lower eastern tier. As she walked, she passed marketplaces where merchants hawked goods from all the walking cities, spices from far-off Terramount, fabrics from the gardens of Verdantil, mechanical curiosities from Cognitea. The people of Aquilon moved about their daily business, largely unaware of the political machinations that might soon alter their lives.
This is what matters,
she thought, watching a water carrier fill the vessels of waiting citizens from one of Aquilon's public fountains. Not marriage alliances or power plays, but ensuring these people have what they need to survive the endless desert. Yet as she continued toward the healing chambers, doubt crept in. Perhaps an alliance with Pyrotus would better protect these people. Perhaps her resistance was selfish, putting personal desires above the needs of Aquilon. The healing chambers were located in a quiet section of the eastern tier. Their crystal walls tinted a soothing pale blue. Chief Healer Mara met Thalia at the entrance, her kind face lined with concern.
Lady Thalia, thank you for coming. The afflicted will be heartened by your visit.
How many now, Healer Mara?
7 in total. The 3 new cases are experiencing the same symptoms as the others. Deep sleep from which they cannot be roused, rapid eye movement, and occasional speaking in fragmented phrases.
The same dreams?
As far as we can tell from what they mutter, yes. Crystal caves, distant voices calling, and something about the 9 returning.
The healer shook her head.
Superstition, perhaps, but the physical symptoms are real enough.
Thalia nodded grimly and followed Mara into the chamber where the afflicted lay on beds arranged in a circle. They appeared to be sleeping peacefully, though occasionally one would twitch or murmur something unintelligible.
Any pattern to who is affected?
She asked, moving to the bedside of the nearest patient, a young man with the calloused hands of a water engineer.
Not that we've discovered. Different ages, occupations, tiers of residence.
She hesitated.
Though all do seem to have particularly vivid dreams normally, according to their families. Those with, forgive me, more active imaginations seem more susceptible.
Thalia felt a chill run through her. She'd always had unusually vivid dreams, even as a child. The young man on the bed suddenly stirred, his eyes moving rapidly beneath closed lids. "Crystal! Breaking!" he muttered, his voice strained. "The first, she calls, blood of the Plague Maker." Thalia leaned closer, something about his words resonating with her own disturbing dreams.
What did he say? The blood of the what?
The Plague Maker. Several have mentioned it. We thought perhaps it referred to the original source of the dream plague from the ancient texts.
The Plague Maker?
Thalia thought, a strange humming sensation building behind her breastbone. In her dreams, there had been voices calling for something similar. A key, they called it. The blood that could unlock or seal. She spent the next hour moving among the afflicted, listening to their murmurs, speaking soft words of comfort when they grew agitated. One woman, older than the others, suddenly gripped Thalia's wrist with surprising strength when she approached.
"The daughters know,"
she said, her eyes still closed, but her voice suddenly clear.
"Violet eyes see the way. The Mist Child guards the threshold."
Then her grip loosened, and she fell back into her restless sleep. Mara hurried over, checking the woman's pulse.
"What did she say to you?" I'm not sure. Something about daughters and violet eyes."
Thalia stepped back, trying to calm her racing heart.
"Do they ever wake?"
Briefly, sometimes. But they remember nothing of their dreams or what they've said while sleeping.
The healer sighed heavily.
We're doing all we can, but without understanding the cause.
"Keep me informed of any changes. I'll speak to my father about allocating more resources for your research."
Thank you, Lady Thalia.
Thalia left the healing chambers with her mind in turmoil. The dreams that had been visiting her seemed connected to the dream plague, yet she showed no symptoms of the affliction. And the woman's words about violet eyes. Thalia had often been told her deep blue eyes appeared violet in certain light, a trait inherited from her mother's side of the family. Lost in thought, she nearly collided with a messenger rushing through the corridor. "Forgive me, Lady Thalia." The young woman bowed deeply, recognizing her instantly despite the simple cloak. "I was sent to find you. The Fathermark requests your immediate return. The walking city of Pyrotus has been sighted on the horizon. They will reach the Sapphire Oasis by sunset, hours ahead of schedule."
"Thank you. Please inform my father I am on my way."
As the messenger hurried off, Thalia took a moment to compose herself. Sooner than expected, she would be face to face with the man who sought her hand in political marriage. Sooner than expected, the careful dance of diplomacy would begin. She straightened her shoulders beneath the simple blue cloak, feeling the weight of both her official duties and her secret dreams pressing upon her. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to be simply Thalia. Not a daughter of Aquilon, not a political asset, not a vessel for diplomatic relations.
Perhaps that's what makes masquerades so perfect.
Lissa's words echoed in her mind. For one night, you could be anyone. Tomorrow night, behind the anonymity of a mask, perhaps she could find a moment of that freedom. A single moment to be the person she glimpsed only in stolen hours in the water art sanctuary or the engineering archives, the person who existed in those spaces between duty and protocol. But for now, duty called. Thalia pulled back her hood, revealing her circlet and elaborately braided hair, the visible symbols of who she was expected to be. With measured steps, she began the ascent back to the upper tiers of Aquilon, where the Fathermark's daughter was needed once more. Chapter 2. The Messenger's Mask. The sapphire oasis glittered like a jewel nestled in endless sand, its waters transformed into a mirror for the 3 moons that hung low in the night sky. 6 colossal beasts lay in semicircle around its edges, their mammoth bodies creating a natural amphitheater. The walking cities they carried stood dark and majestic against the star-strewn desert sky, their towers and spires illuminated by thousands of lanterns that rivaled the constellations above. Elian Norwood crouched behind a ridge of crystallized sand, watching the procession of dignitaries flowing into the grand pavilion erected at the water's edge. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers that bloomed only during the brief desert nights, and the smoke of rare incense carried from distant lands. Music drifted across the water, the haunting tones of water harps from Aquilon melding with the deep percussion of Pyrotus's flame drums. His fingers tightened around the sealed message tube hidden beneath his cloak. The courier mark branded onto his right wrist, a stylized water droplet encircled by waves, burned with urgency, a magical compulsion that would not be satisfied until his delivery was complete.
3 days of pushing myself beyond exhaustion to get here,
he thought, the bitter taste of stimulant herbs still coating his tongue, only to find myself locked out by ceremony and circumstance. He'd hoped to reach the oasis before the masquerade began, but a sudden, vicious sandstorm had forced him to seek shelter for precious hours. By the time he'd arrived, the celebration was in full swing, and the guards at the pavilion's entrance were turning away anyone without formal invitation or proper costume. The single streak of silver in his otherwise dark hair caught the moonlight as he shifted position. It had appeared after his first blackout episode 3 years ago, a visible mark of whatever strangeness ran in his blood. Now it served as an unwelcome beacon, making him instantly recognizable to any who knew to look for the Fathermarker's trusted courier. Elian ran a hand over his face, feeling the grit of sand and exhaustion beneath his fingertips. Options dwindled with each passing moment. The message-bearer's compulsion was growing stronger, a burning pressure behind his breastbone that demanded completion of his task. The old courier who had trained him had warned that ignoring such a compulsion for too long could drive a man to madness.
There must be a way in.
Movement caught his eye. Servants in the pale green livery of Verdantil, the walking city known for its hanging gardens, carrying trays of refreshments toward a side entrance of the pavilion. Elian studied their path, noting the less vigilant guards posted at the service entrance. A plan began to form, but was quickly discarded when he spotted the distinctive insignia of the sovereign Bellatori guards, stationed even at the servants' entrance. Their heightened senses would detect an impostor instantly, especially one carrying a sealed diplomatic message.
"Sand, take it,"
he muttered under his breath, sliding back down the dune to consider another approach. As he circled around the perimeter of the gathering, the sounds of the celebration growing fainter, Elian noticed something unexpected. A line of ornate carriages parked well beyond the main entrance. While most stood empty, Their drivers gathered in small groups, sharing drinks and stories. One carriage at the farthest end remained closed, its curtains drawn despite the pleasant night air. Curious, Elian approached from the shadows, his footsteps silent in the soft sand. Years of navigating treacherous terrain had taught him to move with fluid grace that belied his tall frame. As he drew closer, he heard the unmistakable sound of snoring from within the carriage. Carefully he eased the door open a fraction. Inside, sprawled across the plush seat and reeking of expensive spirits, lay a man in elaborate costume. A golden mask set with amber jewels had slipped halfway down his face, revealing aristocratic features slackened by intoxication. The insignia of Pyrotus, a flame encircled by a gear, was emblazoned on his cloak in gleaming metallic thread. Opportunity, unexpected and potentially disastrous, presented itself.
This is either brilliant or the worst decision of my life,
he thought, glancing around to ensure no one observed him. The courier mark on his wrist pulsed with renewed urgency, making the decision for him. Moving with practiced efficiency, Elian extracted the nobleman from his finery, careful not to wake him from his drunken stupor. The man mumbled incoherently, but did not stir as Elian arranged him in a more comfortable position on the carriage floor, covering him with a spare blanket.
My apologies, sir,
Elian whispered, securing the golden mask over his own features. I'll return your finery when my task is complete. Consider it borrowed for the good of Aquilon. The costume, a rich ensemble of crimson and gold that marked its wearer as a high-ranking member of Pyrotus society, was slightly too large for Elian's leaner frame. But the elaborate nature of the garment concealed this imperfection. The mask itself was a work of art, crafted to resemble a stylized flame, with extensions that framed the wearer's eyes and concealed most of their face. Elian slipped the message tube into an inner pocket of the borrowed cloak, straightened his shoulders in the manner of nobility, and set out toward the main pavilion entrance. The guards, a mix of enhanced species from various walking cities, straightened to attention as he approached. He could tell from their subtle reactions that they recognized the insignia of an important Pyrotus noble. One of them, a sovereign with gold flecks in his eyes, stepped forward. Your invitation, sir? Elian affected an air of offended dignity, drawing himself up to his full height.
I've presented it once already. I merely stepped out for air.
He allowed irritation to color his tone.
Surely you don't expect Lord Aurelius's personal advisor to carry multiple invitations?
The guard's eyes widened slightly at the implied connection to Pyrotus's ruler. He hesitated, clearly weighing the risk of offending an important dignitary against his duty. Of course not, sir. My apologies. He stepped aside, gesturing for Elian to enter. Enjoy the celebration. Elian inclined his head in regal acknowledgement and passed through the entrance, relief flooding through him even as his heart pounded with the audacity of his deception. The courier mark on his wrist cooled slightly, sensing the proximity to his intended recipient. Inside, the pavilion was a wonder of engineering and art. Crystal columns filled with water rose like living sculptures, their contents shifting and shimmering with bioluminescent organisms imported from the far reaches of the endless desert. The domed ceiling was constructed of translucent material that magnified the moonlight, bathing the interior in a silvery glow that made masks and costumes gleam with ethereal beauty. Hundreds of guests in elaborate disguises moved through the space like exotic birds, their identities concealed behind masks representing the various enhanced species, mythological creatures, or abstract concepts. Music flowed around them, provided by musicians whose instruments had been crafted specifically for this gathering. Everything from the whisper harps of Terramount to the bone flutes of the desert nomads. Elian moved through the crowd with deliberate confidence, eyes scanning for the distinctive blue and silver robes of the Fathermark. The gathered dignitaries parted before him, some offering respectful nods to what they presumed was an important representative of Pyrotus. This unexpected deference unsettled him more than any confrontation might have, a stark reminder of the precariousness of his position.
Find the fathom arc, deliver the message, and disappear before anyone realizes the deception,
he planned, the weight of the message tube a constant presence against his chest, a sudden pressure behind his eyes. The warning sign of an impending blackout made him falter mid-step. Not now. Not here. He forced himself to continue moving, blinking rapidly to clear the sensation of invisible cobwebs forming at the edges of his vision. For a terrifying moment, the pavilion seemed to shift around him, overlaid with the shimmering image of vast crystal caverns stretching into darkness. Voices whispered at the edges of his consciousness, 9 distinct tones speaking words he couldn't quite grasp. Elian pressed a hand to the nearest crystal column, steadying himself as the episode passed. The cool surface beneath his fingers anchored him to reality, driving back the encroaching darkness. When he opened his eyes, the strange vision had faded, leaving only the glittering celebration.
Later,
he promised himself. I'll deal with whatever's happening to me after I complete this delivery. As he oriented himself once more, the crowd before him parted, revealing a vision that momentarily stole his breath. A woman moved through the gathering with ethereal grace, her costume a masterpiece of water artistry. Her gown appeared to be composed of liquid silver that flowed around her with each step, revealing glimpses of pale blue underneath. Her mask, a delicate creation of crystal and pearl that covered the upper half of her face, was designed to evoke falling water, with droplets that caught the light and refracted it into tiny rainbows. Behind the mask, eyes of such a deep blue, they appeared almost violet in the moonlight, surveyed the celebration with quiet intelligence. Something about her called to Elian on a level beyond the physical, a resonance that hummed in his blood and made the silver streak in his hair tingle with recognition. The sensation was both alarming and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a precipice and feeling the urge to leap.
Focus,
he chided himself, tearing his gaze away. The message. The fathom arc. Complete your task. But in that moment of distraction, the currents of the gathering shifted. The musicians began a new composition, a traditional convergence dance that required partners to be chosen spontaneously from among the masked guests. Bodies moved around him in coordinated patterns, and suddenly Elian found himself face to face with the water-masked woman, the crowd having maneuvered them together with deliberate intent. Custom dictated that refusing the dance would bring ill fortune to the convergence. Even as his mind screamed warnings about his mission, his body betrayed him by executing a formal bow.
It seems fate has chosen us, my lady,
he said, his voice low and slightly rough from days of desert travel. Behind her crystalline mask, the woman's eyes widened slightly, as though something in his voice or presence surprised her. She inclined her head with practiced elegance, though Elian detected a hint of reluctance in the gesture.
So it seems,
she replied, her voice musical and clear, yet carrying an undertone of dry amusement.
though fate has curious timing.
As protocol demanded, they moved into the opening positions of the dance. Elian placed one hand lightly at her waist, taking her right hand with his left. The touch, even through layers of fabric, sent a jolt through him like lightning across desert skies. From her subtle intake of breath, he sensed she felt something similar.
Dangerous,
he thought as they began to move in unison with the other couples. Whatever this is, it's dangerous. The dance was complex, requiring partners to mirror each other's movements with increasing intricacy as the music built. Though Elian had learned the steps during his courier training, diplomatic gatherings often included such formalities, he had never performed them with a partner who moved with such intuitive harmony to his own rhythm.
You're not from Paradis,
She observed quietly as they executed a series of turns that briefly separated them from nearby dancers. Elian missed a step in surprise, quickly recovering.
What makes you say that?
He asked, keeping his voice neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in his mind. She smiled faintly behind her mask.
Your hands. They're calloused in ways that suggest desert travel, not forge work. And you dance the Aquilon variation of the steps, not the Pyridus interpretation.
Her eyes studied him with unsettling perception.
Curious costume choice for someone not of flame and fire.
Perhaps I simply appreciate the aesthetics.
He deflected, guiding her through a complicated turn that brought her back to his arms with fluid precision.
Perhaps.
Her tone suggested she believed otherwise.
Or perhaps you're not who you appear to be. An interesting choice at a gathering where appearances are already disguised.
The dance brought them closer, their faces inches apart as the music reached a crescendo. For a heartbeat, the rest of the pavilion seemed to fade away. Elian was acutely aware of the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle scent of water flowers that clung to her skin, the intelligence that shone in those remarkable eyes.
We are all wearing masks of one kind or another, aren't we?
The words escaped him before he could consider their wisdom, revealing more truth than he'd intended. Something in her expression shifted. Recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit who understood the weight of pretense.
Yes.
She replied softly.
Though some of us have worn them so long, we've forgotten what lies beneath.
The music reached its conclusion, and custom dictated they separate with formal acknowledgments. Instead, Elian found himself reluctant to release her hand. The inexplicable connection between them humming like a plucked string. A prickling sensation at the back of his neck broke the moment, the feeling of being watched with predatory intensity. Elian turned slightly, scanning the crowd, and found the source immediately. A tall figure in elaborate ceremonial garb stood at the edge of the dance floor. Though he wore a mask of hammered gold crafted to resemble a stylized sun, there was no mistaking his identity. The subtle gold flecks visible in his eyes, even from a distance, marked him as a sovereign, and the insignia of Pyrotus emblazoned across his chest in jewels that caught the light like captured flames identified him as Lord Cormac Aurelius himself. The intensity of his gaze as it moved between Elian and the water-masked woman carried a possessiveness that made Elian's skin crawl. There was something unnatural in that stare, a hunger that went beyond mere jealousy or territorial claim. The woman beside him had also noticed, her posture stiffening almost imperceptibly.
It seems I've kept you from your master,
she said, her voice cooler now.
How careless of me.
Before Elian could respond, she executed a perfect formal withdrawal, slipping from his grasp with practiced ease.
Thank you for the dance, sir. May your paths be clear and your waters sweet.
The traditional Aquilon farewell confirmed his suspicions about her origin. He inclined his head in response, unable to shake the feeling that something significant was slipping away from him.
And may your journeys bring you to safe harbors,
he replied with the proper response. She turned and moved into the crowd, the silver fabric of her gown catching the light like water rippling over stones. Within moments, she had vanished among the swirl of costumes and masks. Elian fought down the irrational urge to follow her. The courier mark on his wrist burned with renewed insistence, reminding him of his purpose. The brief respite of the dance had passed. Now his mission demanded completion. Movement in his peripheral vision alerted him that Lord Aurelius was approaching. Panic flared briefly. If the real Lord Aurelius's advisor was here, Elian's deception would be discovered immediately. He slipped into the densest part of the crowd, using the press of bodies to mask his escape. Working his way around the perimeter of the pavilion, Elian methodically searched for the feather mark. The distinctive blue and silver robes should have been easy to spot among the colorful costumes, but the Aquilon leader was nowhere to be seen.
He must be in one of the private chambers,
Elian realized, eyeing the guarded entrances to smaller meeting rooms that branched off from the main pavilion. Approaching the nearest guard, A stern-faced Bellatori woman whose enhanced muscles were visible even beneath her formal uniform, Elian adopted the arrogant bearing he'd observed in true nobility.
I carry an urgent communication for the Fathomark of Aquilon,
he stated, allowing his legitimate courier credentials to infuse his tone with authority despite his false appearance.
Where might I find him?
The guard assessed him with calculating eyes. The Fathomark is in private conference and has left orders not to be disturbed.
This cannot wait,
Elian insisted, feeling the courier mark burn hotter, sensing the proximity of his intended recipient.
It concerns matters of water security.
The guard's expression remained impassive, but her posture shifted subtly. The invocation of water security, Aquilon's most vital concern, had made an impression. Third chamber on the right, she relented. But he will not thank you for the interruption.
Few ever thank me for interruptions,
Elian muttered as he moved past her.
Yet they'd thank me less for silence.
The corridor leading to the private chambers was quieter, the sounds of celebration muffled by thick fabric hangings embroidered with the symbols of all 9 walking cities. Elian counted doors until he reached the third on the right, pausing to straighten his borrowed finery before knocking firmly. A moment of silence followed, then a voice he recognized as the Fathomark's chief attendant.
Enter.
Elian pushed open the door to find a circular chamber occupied by several figures seated around a low table. Maps and documents were spread across its surface, the serious expressions of those present suggesting discussions far removed from the festive atmosphere outside. The Fathomark sat at the head of the table, his blue and silver robes shimmering with embedded water crystals that hummed with stored energy. To his left was Grand Hydrologist Nerin, whose perpetually damp robes clung to his thin frame. To his right, startlingly, was the woman from the dance floor, her water mask now removed to reveal the delicate features of Thalia Maravan, the Fathomark's daughter. Her eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with suspicion as she took in his Pirotus costume.
What is the meaning of this interruption?
The Fathomark demanded, his deep voice carrying the weight of authority earned through decades of leadership. Elian quickly removed the golden mask, revealing his face and the distinctive silver streak in his dark hair.
Courier Elian Norwood, Your Eminence,
he said, executing a formal bow.
I bring urgent intelligence from the Eastern Territories.
Recognition replaced anger in the Fathomark's expression.
Norwood, you're 3 days early, and...
His gaze took in the borrowed Pirotus finery with a mixture of amusement and concern.
Creatively attired.
Circumstances required improvisation, Your Eminence.
Elian withdrew the sealed message tube from within his cloak.
The message bearer's compulsion grew too urgent to wait for proper protocols.
At the mention of the compulsion, the Fathomark's expression grew grave. He gestured for the tube, breaking the seal with practiced efficiency. As he unrolled the parchment inside, the courier mark on Elian's wrist finally cooled, the burning sensation replaced by the cool relief of completion. The Fathomark read the message, his face becoming increasingly grim with each line. When he finished, he passed it to Nerin without comment, then fixed Elian with a penetrating stare.
How much do you know of the contents?
Nothing, Your Eminence. I was instructed only to deliver it with all haste.
And yet you chose to attend a dance before completing your mission.
There was no accusation in his tone, merely observation. Elian felt heat rise to his face, acutely aware of Thalia's gaze upon him.
The guards would not admit me without proper attire. The dance.
He hesitated, unwilling to admit the compulsion he'd felt toward the Fathomark's daughter.
It was unavoidable if I wished to maintain my cover.
The Fathomark studied him for a long moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied.
You've done well, Courier Norwood. The information you brought may have saved countless lives.
If it can be verified?
Nerin interjected, his perpetually damp fingers leaving watermarks on the parchment as he set it down.
These claims are extraordinary.
And consistent with our own findings,
the Fathomark countered. He turned back to Elian.
Your service to Aquilon is noted and appreciated. You've earned rest and refreshment.
It was a dismissal, albeit a gracious one. Elian bowed again, preparing to withdraw, but found himself hesitating, gaze drawn inexorably to Thalia. She was watching him with an unreadable expression, though he thought he detected a hint of curiosity beneath her diplomatic mask.
Thank you, Your Eminence.
He stepped back, forcing himself to look away from Thalia.
I'll return this borrowed attire to its rightful owner and resume my proper station.
A moment, Courier Norwood.
The Fathermark said, stopping him.
I may have further need of your services before the convergence concludes. Make yourself available.
As you command, Your Eminence.
As he backed towards the door, Elian risked one final glance at Thalia. For the briefest moment, their eyes met, and that inexplicable resonance hummed between them again, a connection that defied explanation, yet felt as natural as breathing. Then she looked away, composing her features into the perfect mask of diplomatic neutrality. Elian slipped out of the chamber, closing the door quietly behind him. The corridor seemed darker now, the sounds of celebration more distant. He leaned against the wall for a moment, allowing the tension of his completed mission to drain from his body, leaving exhaustion in its wake.
What was that?
He wondered, the memory of Thalia's eyes haunting him. What is this pull I feel toward her? He had no answer, only the certainty that whatever had passed between them during that dance was both significant and dangerous. Dangerous because she was the Fathermark's daughter, a woman so far above his station that any connection was impossible. Dangerous because of the possessive way Lord Aurelius had watched her. Dangerous because of the strange blackouts that plagued him, the silver streak in his hair that marked him as somehow other. Forcing these thoughts aside, Elian straightened his borrowed finery and prepared to make his way back through the celebration. He would return the costume, find proper quarters, and await the Fathermark's next command. That was his duty. That was his purpose. Yet as he moved toward the main pavilion, the memory of Thalia's voice lingered in his mind. Though some of us have worn them so long, we've forgotten what lies beneath. For the first time in years, Elian found himself wondering what lay beneath his own carefully constructed mask, and whether he was ready to discover the truth. Unnoticed in the shadows of the corridor, a figure watched his departure with calculated interest. Lord Cormac Aurelius removed his golden sun mask, revealing handsome features arranged in an expression of cold speculation. The gold flecks in his eyes seemed to shift and swirl as he processed what he had witnessed. The recognition between the courier and Thalia Maravan, the intensity of their connection during the dance, the delivery of a message that had clearly disturbed the Fathermark. How unexpected, he murmured to himself, his voice carrying the subtle, compelling resonance unique to sovereigns.
A courier with a silver streak and a connection to the Maravan girl.
He tapped one finger thoughtfully against his lips, then replaced his mask with deliberate care.
Pieces moving on the board before their time. Adjustments will be necessary.
He tilted his head slightly, addressing what appeared to be an empty patch of darkness where the corridor wall met the ceiling.
Follow him, learn his habits, his weaknesses.
His voice carried the subtle, resonant undertone of sovereign command.
But do not interfere. Not yet.
A section of shadow seemed to ripple in acknowledgement, detaching from the wall like liquid darkness. It hung suspended for a heartbeat before melting into the deeper shadows of the corridor. Those with keen eyes might have glimpsed a humanoid silhouette, with slightly translucent edges, its form briefly solidifying before dissolving again, as it leapt from shadow to shadow in Elian's wake. The umbral's presence left a lingering chill in its path, a coldness that had nothing to do with desert nights. Cormac smiled thinly, satisfied with his agent's silent compliance. With elegant, unhurried steps, he moved back toward the celebration, already calculating how to incorporate this new information into his carefully laid plans. Behind him, the darkness writhed and then stilled, as if the very shadows held their breath in anticipation of what was to come.